Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about something small, green and far more dramatic than you'd ever expect. Tea. Not the trendy matcha latte kind, but the humble leaf that somehow managed to shape empires, topple governments and start wars, all while quietly steeping in hot water. It's a story that begins long before tea bags and porcelain cups in the mists of ancient China, where one curious emperor accidentally brewed history's most peaceful revolution. Honestly, if you think your kitchen experiments are chaotic, you'd have never survived his. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where and when you're listening from. Is it late at night where you are? Maybe raining a little? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the haze of a long-forgotten dawn, somewhere in the mountains of Yunnan, China. The air feels alive, cool, damp, and carrying a scent that's part rain, part earth, and part something you can't quite name. A few thin trails of smoke curl up from clay hearths. The hills roll like the backs of sleeping dragons, their slopes covered in green leaves trembling under the first sunlight. That's tea, not yet dried, not yet revered. Just another wild shrub watched over by farmers who think of it more as medicine than magic. And somewhere, beneath a mulberry tree, Emperor Shen Nong, the ancient ruler, the so-called divine farmer, is about to have a very strange afternoon. He's sitting beside a small fire boiling water because he believes boiled water keeps the body pure. He's not wrong, by the way. If he lived today, he'd have an entire YouTube channel on detoxing. Then a breeze rustles the branches above him and a few wild leaves fall straight into his pot. The steam rises, curling around his face, and suddenly the air smells sweet, earthy, a little bitter. He tastes it, cautiously, and something changes. They say that moment was the birth of tea. Not an invention, but an accident. And honestly, aren't most great discoveries like that? Fire penicillin, the first burrito. None of them planned, all of them miraculous. You can almost see Shen Nong's attendants standing behind him, unsure whether to panic or pretend it's all part of the plan. But the emperor just smiles, eyes closed, and keeps sipping. Later, he'll write about the drink in his Divine Farmer's Herb Manual, calling it a remedy that drives away sleep and gladdens the heart, which, if you think about it, makes him both the first tea influencer and the first man to experience a caffeine high in recorded history. For centuries after that, tea remains something sacred, used mostly in medicine. Villagers dry the leaves, grind them into powder, and brew them for headaches, stomach pain, or just the fatigue of long workdays. Somewhere in a quiet valley, a mother tells her child to drink a little when the rain chills the bones. Somewhere else, monks begin boiling the leaves before meditation, believing it helps them stay awake. And you know, maybe it did. They didn't have espresso machines after all. The legend of Shen Nong spreads slowly, through dynasties across borders, and each retelling adds a shimmer of myth. Some say the emperor tested hundreds of plants and discovered tea only after nearly dying from poison. Others claim he could see through his own belly to watch how herbs affected his body. Historians still debate whether he was a real man or a symbol of humanity's curiosity. That ancient urge to sip the unknown and hope it won't kill you. But no matter what you believe, the story has already taken root. By the time of the Tang dynasty, tea has grown from medicine to art. Farmers start tending their plants with care, drying leaves in the sun, crushing and pressing them into cakes. The process becomes delicate, almost reverent, part chemistry, part poetry. The first tea masters appear, writing poems about the ideal brew temperature, the way steam should rise like a silk scarf in morning light. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the rhythm of their world, the scrape of bamboo whisks, the whisper of hot water poured into clay. Tea isn't just a drink anymore, it's a language. The cup becomes a stage for silence, reflection, and calm. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the world was craving all along. A reason to pause. In the great cities, scholars gather in gardens to taste and debate. One says, the flavor of good tea should be like a gentle conversation. Soft, but never dull. Another replies, no. It should be like rain on bamboo, clean, short, and unforgettable. And you, listening centuries later, can't help but smile, because people are still arguing over how tea should taste. Humanity never changes. You wander through those old markets in your mind, the scent of roasting leaves mingling with the smoke of cooking fires, the clink of bronze coins, the hum of chatter. A merchant waves at you, offering a cup. The liquid is pale green, clear enough to see the reflection of a paper lantern above. You take a sip and it's almost grassy, almost floral, but mostly something impossible to describe. A taste like the idea of warmth itself. And somewhere deep inside, you realize this is how empires begin. Not with war drums or speeches, but with quiet cravings. Tea, that little accident under a mulberry tree, begins to drift across borders, carried by travelers and dreamers. It slips into rituals, into art, into stories told by candlelight. Centuries will pass, dynasties will fall, and yet every dawn, someone somewhere will still be boiling water, waiting for the steam to whisper its secret. It's funny to think that everything, from global trade to revolutions, could start with such a gentle thing. A few leaves, some hot water, a curious emperor. You'd think history would demand something louder, but no. Sometimes it begins with silence. As you sit here now, maybe with your own cup nearby, you can almost feel the thread connecting that first sip to yours. Warm, fragile, stretching through time. In the hush of your room, you hear it. The sound of water just beginning to simmer, soft and steady like a heartbeat. The story is only beginning. The steam still curls softly in front of you, rising in thin, ghostly ribbons that catch the light like silk threads. You watch it drift upward and think, this isn't just steam, it's memory. The same delicate breath that once swirled around the hands of emperors and monks, the same faint warmth that carried stories across centuries. Tonight, that whisper of steam invites you back to where it all began. You're standing now in the misty hills of ancient Yunnan, long before there were borders or empires. The air smells like rain and earth, and somewhere nearby a kettle hums on an open flame. The legend says it happened around 2737 BCE. The great Emperor Shen Nong, scholar, herbalist and part-time accidental genius, was sitting beneath a strange tree. He was the kind of man who liked his water boiled, clean, predictable, safe. But fate has a sense of humor. A soft wind brushed through the leaves, and a few of them drifted down into his pot. The water turned pale gold. Shen Nong, curious as ever, lifted the pot to his lips and took a sip. The taste was light, fragrant, a little bitter but somehow soothing. And just like that, tea was born, not from invention but from accident. You can almost see the look on his face, the dawning realization that the world had just changed because he forgot to put a lid on his kettle. If you ever spill your drink, remember Shen Nong did it first, and it started a civilization. From that moment on, the leaves became something sacred. People experimented, brewed, boiled, and ground them. At first, tea was medicine, a way to wake the mind and calm the body. But slowly it became something else, a ritual, a philosophy. By the time of the Tang dynasty, the act of drinking tea wasn't about thirst anymore. It was about clarity. Imagine a quiet monastery. Lanterns flicker against paper walls. A monk sits before a small clay pot, watching bubbles form. He breathes slowly, pours the water in circles and waits. Steam rises, curls, fades. In that pause between boiling and sipping, he finds stillness. One old Tang poem called Tea Liquid Meditation. A single cup could wash away the dust of the world. 2 cups could open the door of the soul, and 3 would show you yourself. You think of that as you watch your own cup cooling beside you. The air hums softly, like a breath between centuries, but not everyone was chasing enlightenment. Some people, very humanly, were chasing profits. As the Tang Empire opened its trade routes westward, caravans began carrying tea bricks across deserts and mountains. Picture the Silk Road at dawn, camels shifting in the sand, bells jingling, traders bargaining in a dozen tongues. Alongside silk, porcelain, and jade, bundles of dried leaves made their way into foreign hands. By the Song dynasty, tea was both high art and hard currency. People pressed it into cakes stamped with imperial dragons. Some even used those tea cakes as money. Imagine buying a horse with a stack of drinkable coins. Economically brilliant. Logistically, sticky. Historians still debate when exactly tea crossed the oceans, but most agree it first reached Europe in the 1600s through the hands of Portuguese and Dutch merchants. When those ships unloaded their crates, the Europeans stared at the strange brown leaves like they'd just discovered alien food. The first brews were met with polite confusion. "It smells like flowers," they said. "But it's hot water." Eventually, someone added sugar. Someone else added milk. And suddenly, people couldn't stop talking about it. Londoners, once loyal to ale and gin, now gathered in tea houses. Penny universities, they called them, where for 1 penny you could buy a cup of tea and an earful of gossip. Ideas brewed faster than the kettles boiled. Revolutions were practically steeping alongside the leaves. There's something ironic about it. A drink born in the quiet hills of China became the background noise of noisy debates and political scheming. The same steam that once carried silence now carried rumors about the king's debts, parliament scandals, and which aristocrat had eloped with whom. If Shen Nong could have heard it, he'd probably have spat out his tea. Yet across all that noise, the leaf itself remained patient. Empires rose, kings died, wars came and went, but tea stayed the same, gentle, humble, waiting to be poured. It was a thread connecting monks, merchants, and monarchs. You can't rush tea. The water has to boil. The leaves have to breathe. The moment has to steep. By the Ming dynasty, powdered and compressed tea gave way to loose leaves. The shift changed everything. Brewing became an art form. The color of the clay, the temperature of the water, the curve of the wrist when pouring. It all mattered. It wasn't just about taste anymore. It was about mindfulness. A person's character could be judged by how they handled the teapot. Japan took that idea and turned it into shanoyu, the tea ceremony. Every motion was deliberate, every silence meaningful. Pour too fast and you showed impatience. Hold the bowl wrong and you revealed ego. A perfect ceremony could take hours, ending with a single sip of lukewarm tea and an unspoken feeling of peace. That's commitment for a drink with no sugar. Some monks joked that the first cup awakened the mind, and the third sent it spiraling into enlightenment or insomnia. Historians still argue which effect was more common. Meanwhile, the British were discovering something the Chinese had long known. That tea was addictive, not because of caffeine, but because of calm. There was comfort in the repetition, the pouring, the stirring, the slow exhale before each sip. It was both ordinary and divine, a reminder that control and chaos could coexist in a cup. Picture a ship docking in London, its hull filled with tea crates stamped with Chinese characters. As the workers pry open the lids, a faint scent escapes a whisper from across the world. In drawing rooms, noblewomen gossip over dainty porcelain cups. In crowded ports, sailors drink the same brew from chipped mugs. Somewhere in between, a merchant quietly smiles. He knows these leaves are worth more than gold. The tea trade would soon reshape the world. Empires built fortunes on it, navies sailed to protect it, and entire wars would be waged in its name. But for now, it's just steam. Rising, whispering, you sit there in the dark watching your own cup cool. The air smells faintly of flowers and thyme. Somewhere very far away, the hills of Yunnan still breathe through their leaves. You can almost hear them softly, steadily, reminding you that every empire begins with a sip. The steam fades, but the story doesn't. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the first ships are already leaving for distant lands, carrying more than just cargo. They're carrying the quiet power of a leaf that once fell into a pot by accident. And as you breathe in the last curl of warmth, you realize history, like tea, is best when it's allowed to steep slowly. You're still sitting there, the last trace of steam fading from your cup, when the air around you shifts. The hum of your fan becomes the distant creak of wooden wheels. Sand crunches beneath invisible hooves. When you blink, the world feels drier, the air heavier, as if the hills of Yunnan have stretched into endless desert. The story has moved westward, and you've moved with it. You find yourself standing along the Silk Road, not the glossy textbook version, but the real one, sunburnt traders, coughing camels and the smell of sweat, spice, and dust that clings to everything. You can hear the jingle of bronze bells tied around the animals' necks. A caravan moves slowly across the dunes, each rider bundled in layers of silk and wool, their faces hidden from the wind. And buried among the bolts of fabric, the carved ivory and the blocks of jade, are bundles of tea, pressed into tight, dark bricks stamped with Chinese characters. Those bricks are more than just drink. They're currency. In some villages, one tea brick could buy you a goat. In others, two might earn you a night's shelter. It's strange to think that leaves once used for meditation now fund entire expeditions. But that's how history works. Every sacred thing eventually gets a price tag. As the caravans move west, tea becomes a kind of quiet diplomat. It travels not by ship or decree, but by conversation, trader to trader, cup to cup. Picture a tent glowing in the desert night. Outside, the stars are mercilessly bright. Inside, men huddle over a small kettle, boiling water that tastes faintly of sand. They pour it over the dark tea bricks, watch the color bloom, and for a moment there's silence. No borders, no empires, just the simple comfort of warmth shared between strangers. It's easy to romanticize the Silk Road, but it wasn't a pleasant commute. Bandits lurked in every pass, and storms could erase whole caravans overnight. Yet people kept traveling, drawn by the shimmer of profit, and maybe a little by curiosity. One Chinese poem from that era describes merchants chasing the scent of tea farther than any wind could carry it. You imagine that, thousands of miles of dust, and still they followed a smell. By the time the caravans reached Persia, the tea had changed hands a dozen times. Along with silk and porcelain, it became one of the empire's most prized imports. In grand Persian courtyards, poets and nobles gathered to sip from delicate cups, their reflections shimmering in polished brass trays. The tea was brewed thick and strong, often sweetened with honey and flavored with herbs. To them, it wasn't Chinese anymore. It had become Persian, a symbol of hospitality, of poetry, of lingering conversations that lasted past midnight. Porcelain, meanwhile, was creating its own quiet revolution. The same ships and caravans that carried tea also carried the delicate blue and white ceramics that would become famous around the world. Imagine for a moment the first time a Persian artisan held a porcelain cup from Jingdezhen, thin as eggshell, glowing faintly when held to the light. It must have seemed like magic. They tried to replicate it, of course. They mixed clays, adjusted fires, experimented with glazes. But true porcelain remained a secret, guarded fiercely by the Chinese for centuries. It wasn't until much later that Europe would finally learn the formula. For now, the mystery lingered, shimmering in every sip. You can almost picture one of those early caravans resting by an oasis at sunset. The air smells like salt and camel fur. A merchant kneels beside a pot, his face illuminated by firelight. He lifts a porcelain cup to his lips, a tiny, fragile thing that somehow survived the journey across 1,000 miles of dust. The reflection of the stars trembles on its surface. He takes a slow sip, closes his eyes, and for that moment even the desert feels soft. That's the strange power of tea. It softens the edges of the world. As the centuries roll by, more and more people fall under its quiet spell. In Russia, caravans arrive by winter, bringing bricks of tea that had traveled for months across frozen lakes. The Russians brew it dark and smoky, the scent of pine wood and charcoal in every cup. In their cold wooden homes, they keep a kettle, a samovar, always hot, always ready. You can almost hear it hiss softly in the corner, like a patient old friend. But trade isn't just about sharing. It's also about control. Every empire along the Silk Road taxes, hoards, and bargains. Tea, once sacred, becomes another tool of politics. The Mongols drink it for strength, the Persians for elegance, the Russians for endurance. Each culture claims it, shapes it, bends it. And somewhere back in China, a pot is still boiling quietly. The same leaf, the same ritual, unchanged. Historians still debate whether tea's journey westward changed the world more through commerce or through culture. Was it a matter of economics or emotion? Did people fall in love with the taste or the feeling of connection it carried? The answer, like most of history, is probably both. Meanwhile, porcelain continues to enchant. When the first European merchants saw it, they were convinced it wasn't made by human hands. Some called it white gold. In Italy, collectors displayed porcelain cups like sacred relics. In Spain, nobles drank hot chocolate from them, believing porcelain could tame the heat. And in England, centuries later, it would become inseparable from tea itself. Fine china for fine conversation, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. For now, the world is still moving at the pace of a camel's stride. The air shimmers, the dunes shift, and somewhere in the distance a gong rings faintly through the heat. The sound means the caravan is ready to move again. You take one last look around the oasis. The merchants are packing up their tents, tying ropes, balancing crates of silk, spice, and tea. The sun bleeds red along the horizon. A lone teacup glints among the sand. Porcelain against eternity. You bend down, trace its rim with your finger, and feel the faint warmth of the day still clinging to it. The cup feels impossibly fragile, yet it has survived this far. Maybe that's the real secret of tea, endurance disguised as delicacy. As the caravan fades into the night, the wind carries the smell of smoke and sweetness. The stars wheel slowly above you. Somewhere to the west, beyond deserts and empires, a new chapter is waiting. A chapter written not in sand but in steam. The porcelain dreams are traveling farther now, across oceans toward new hands and new hungers. And though the desert falls silent again, you can almost hear the soft clink of porcelain echoing into the distance, whispering promises of the world's next obsession. The island where afternoon tea becomes an empire's favorite ritual. The mist curls around your ankles as you step onto the docks of the Isles. The air cool, briny and humming faintly, with gull cries and ship bells. You're standing in a place that feels like it has always existed, halfway between fog and fantasy. England, sometime in the 1600s. You can almost taste the dampness in the wind, mixed with smoke from the new warehouses by the Thames and something faintly foreign, a hint of spice, salt, and maybe tea leaves drying in secret. You follow the scent toward a small shop tucked between a candle maker and a fishmonger. Its sign is painted with a teapot so ornate, it looks out of place in this grey world. Inside, the warmth hits your face. A swirl of wood smoke and sweet bitterness, a dozen little crates marked in Chinese characters. The merchant behind the counter doesn't greet you right away. He's too busy scooping delicate leaves into a tin with the reverence of a priest arranging relics. This is one of the first tea shops in London. The year is roughly 1657, and nobody yet realizes they're witnessing the quiet birth of a cultural obsession that will outlast empires. Back then, tea isn't something people drink casually. It's exotic, expensive, the kind of luxury whispered about at court. Each cup costs more than a day's wage for most. It's rumored that when Queen Catherine of Braganza, wife to King Charles II, brings her Portuguese taste for tea to England, she makes it fashionable overnight. You imagine her sipping in candlelight, porcelain glinting as courtiers lean closer, pretending they understand this strange ritual. The tea she drinks isn't just a beverage, it's status, power, and mystery in liquid form. But behind the glamour, something deeper is brewing, the start of an addiction that will tie an empire to a leaf. As you wander back out into the damp London air, the fog has thickened. It clings to your coat like silk spun from the sea. Somewhere behind you, the sound of pouring tea drips in rhythm with the rain, soft, steady, and somehow foreboding. The city doesn't know it yet, but its veins are about to be infused with caffeine and colonial ambition. Ships from the East India Company glide silently down the Thames, carrying silk, porcelain, and chests of tea, marked with crimson stamps. You can almost see the sailors unloading them, hands numb, breath fogging, while clerks tally up ledgers in flickering lamplight. Each crate represents more than trade. It's a promise that the world can be shrunk, packaged, and consumed. You walk further inland, following the tea's trail as it begins to infiltrate homes and hearts. In coffee houses, those smoky, loud arenas of gossip and deals, tea starts to appear beside the bitter brew. It's softer, subtler, more refined. The poets drink it while pretending to think deep thoughts. The merchants drink it while pretending to have souls. And the aristocrats? They drink it because everyone else does. One night you slip into one of those coffee houses. It's loud, chaotic. A swirl of ink-stained fingers and clinking coins. Someone nearby mutters that tea will never catch on. It's a woman's drink. Someone else scoffs and says, it's not the drink that matters, it's where it comes from. You glance at the steaming cups, the imported china, and realize they're right. Tea isn't just changing taste, it's changing trade, class, and even gender. Outside, the city grows restless. Street vendors start hawking cheap imitations. Herbs and leaves boiled to mimic the real thing. Recipes for tea appear in pamphlets alongside poetry and scandal. And in drawing rooms, London's ladies begin inviting friends for tea visits, tiny revolutions wrapped in lace. Behind every polite conversation, alliances are being brewed stronger than any leaf could manage. Historians still debate how quickly tea truly conquered England. Some argue it spread through fashion, others claim it was empire that made it inevitable. But maybe you think it was something simpler, the warmth of it on a cold grey day, the illusion of comfort in a cup. As you stroll past the Tower of London, its black stones slick with rain, you think about the irony. The same empire that sips tea to calm its nerves will one day fight wars to control its supply. The same liquid that soothes the heart will fuel conquest across oceans. You pause at the edge of the river, watching the mist thicken into near night. Somewhere across the globe, farmers are tending to the plants that feed this empire's craving. Unaware that their leaves will one day rewrite history, you pull your coat tighter and listen to the river. The Thames whispers like steam escaping a kettle. It's the sound of something beginning, quietly, persistently. The kind of sound you don't notice until it's too late. And as the bells toll in the distance, you realize something. Empires rarely start with thunder. Sometimes they begin with a single delicate sip. You smile to yourself, a little shiver running down your spine. Maybe it's the chill. Maybe it's the thought that history's biggest storms often start in teacups. And as the mist closes in again, you can almost hear it. That faint clink of porcelain echoing through time. The fog doesn't really lift, it just fades into the next morning, like a ghost that forgot to leave. You find yourself walking through London's narrow streets again, only now they feel busier, louder, and somehow more confident. The scent of coal smoke mixes with something sharper, a kind of dry sweetness that clings to the air. Somewhere a kettle is hissing. Somewhere else a carriage wheel splashes through a puddle that reflects a sky the color of tarnished pewter. England has changed. You can feel it. The quiet fascination with tea has turned into a national obsession. Everyone from dock workers to duchesses wants a cup. And the East India Company. Oh, they're more than happy to provide. You pass their headquarters on Leadenhall Street, tall, stern, and humming with ambition. Inside, men in powdered wigs whisper over ledgers and maps, their fingers stained with ink and greed. The clatter of quills might as well be the sound of chains being forged. The East India Company isn't just a company, it's practically a country. It has its own army, its own laws, its own way of reshaping the world. You picture their ships lined up like hungry beasts, ready to devour coastlines from Bengal to Canton. Tea is the jewel in their crown, the leaf that funds their empire. And England drinks it down without a thought, as if every sip doesn't come steeped in someone else's sweat. You wander along the riverbank, where the docks are alive with noise. Sailors shouting, ropes creaking, crates thudding onto wet wood. Each chest is stenciled with the familiar letters EIC, sealed tight with wax and power. The air smells of salt and empire. A clerk nearby counts crates under his breath. 37, 38. And you wonder if he has any idea what's inside. Beyond numbers and profit. Someone hands you a cup. Thin porcelain, blue and white. Imported, of course. The tea is dark, bitter and strong. It's not just a drink anymore. It's a declaration. You sip, and the world tilts slightly, as though you can taste both comfort and conquest in one swallow. In grand drawing rooms, ladies gossip about the latest shipments from China, their laughter as brittle as the porcelain in their hands. They talk about Darjeeling and Ceylon as if they're simply places on a map, not living lands under foreign rule. Their husbands sit nearby, reading trade reports that sound more like military briefings. You hear phrases like profit margins, exclusive monopoly, and strategic ports. You realize tea isn't just fueling mornings anymore. It's fueling an empire. Outside those glittering salons, the common folk are catching on too. Tea becomes the great equalizer, the one luxury that slips past class boundaries. Workers brew it in tin mugs before heading to factories. Mothers save coins to buy tiny bags of leaves, stretching them across a week. Tea becomes warmth in a cold home, calm in a noisy life. Still, not everyone is content. You overhear murmurs in coffee houses and on the streets. All this tea but no freedom, someone grumbles. Another answers, freedom doesn't pay dividends. A laugh follows, but it's a bitter one. There's a rumor spreading, soft but insistent, about how the East India Company's grip on India tightens each year. Taxes rise, farmers starve, and fields once filled with grain are now filled with cash crops for export. Somewhere far away under a hotter sun, men are harvesting the leaves that fill your cup. Their hands move with practiced precision, though they'll never taste what they pick. You pause, letting the image sink in. The wind off the river tastes metallic now. The water ripples, and for a moment, you think you can see reflections of ships massive and pale sailing through time. Historians still argue about this era. Some call it the golden age of trade, and while others call it the quiet theft of the world. But history, as always, prefers its stories neat and brewed to taste. You can't help but think, The empire's favorite drink was also its favorite disguise. As the years roll on, the East India Company becomes a shadow government. Its clerks are kings in everything but name. Its soldiers enforce trade routes with muskets and bayonets. And every cup of tea back home carries the illusion of civility white porcelain, masking the darkness beneath. You pass a market stall where a vendor calls out, "Best Assam, fresh from the Indies." His voice is cheerful, rehearsed. Behind him, a poster flutters on the wall, an advertisement for the company printed with a golden lion and the words, "Commerce and Civilization." You laugh quietly to yourself. Commerce and civilization. Two flavors of the same brew, just sweetened differently. A drizzle begins to fall, soft and persistent, the kind that turns cobblestone slick and mirrors the glow of gas lamps. You stand under a canopy and listen to the rain blend with the faint whistle of boiling water from some nearby window. It's almost soothing, until you remember that every kettle's whistle echoes across continents. By the time the rain stops, the city feels alive again. Workers hurry past with bundles, horses clop through puddles, and the smell of wet earth mixes with the scent of tea from open doorways. You follow it, tracing the invisible lines that connect London to Calcutta, to Canton, to every place where the empire's shadow falls. There's something both beautiful and terrifying about it, the way a simple leaf could bind worlds together, could build fortunes and break nations. You think of that first teapot in the foggy little shop, the one that seemed almost magical. It's strange how small beginnings always taste so innocent. You reach the edge of the city as night settles. The river gleams like a ribbon of ink. Somewhere downstream a ship bellows, and you imagine another fleet already loading for the next voyage. More crates, more dreams, more debts. The empire hums quietly in the distance, like a kettle just beginning to boil, and you, standing there in the cool evening air, can't help but smile at the irony. The British Empire didn't just drink tea, it became tea. Hot, addictive, and best enjoyed before it gets cold. The night stretches long and cold over the Atlantic, and when dawn finally cracks, you find yourself on another shore entirely. The air smells sharper here, salt and pine and a hint of something restless. You hear gulls cry overhead, see the masts of ships cutting through the morning mist like dark needles. Boston Harbor, a world away from London's polite drawing rooms and the East India Company's ledgers. Yet somehow, every drop of tea here carries their shadow. The colonies have grown tired of taxes, tired of kings, tired of drinking their loyalty one cup at a time. You can feel the irritation in the air, as thick as the smoke curling from tavern chimneys. Every conversation starts mild and ends in mutters. No taxation without representation, someone grumbles over a pint. It's practically a lullaby now, hummed between sips of ale and frustration. But here's the funny part, tea itself isn't the enemy. People love it. They crave it. It's comfort, it's habit. The problem is that every single chest of tea arriving on these docks carries a political statement, whether anyone likes it or not. Because the moment you pour a cup, you're choosing a side. You step into a small tavern off Milk Street. The air inside is thick with pipe smoke and the smell of bread just out of the oven. A group of men sit huddled in a corner, their heads close, their voices low. You recognize a few faces, John Hancock, Samuel Adams, names that will one day be etched into history like tea stains on parchment. For now, though, they're just men with tired eyes and a growing sense that the empire doesn't listen anymore. Outside, crates of East India Company tea are stacked high on the ship's Dartmouth. Eleanor and Beaver waiting to be unloaded. The British say it's just trade. The colonists say it's a trap. You can almost hear the tension humming through the rigging. Someone laughs in the tavern softly, nervously. They're talking about how unfair it all is, the tea act that lets the companies sell directly, undercutting local merchants. It's not even about the money anymore, one man says, slamming his hand on the table. It's about dignity. The mugs rattle slightly, and you think, revolutions probably start this way, not with a shout, but with a soft thud of agreement. Night falls early in December. The harbour lies under a pale moon, and the air has that sharp metallic chill that bites your fingers. A crowd gathers at the Old South Meeting House. Thousands of people pressed shoulder to shoulder, candles flickering, voices rising and falling like the tide. You hear the debate stretch on for hours, words tumbling over each other. Boycott it. Send it back. Burn it. No one can quite agree, but everyone feels the same tremor of defiance deep in their bones. Then at last Samuel Adams stands. His voice cuts through the noise. This meeting can do nothing more to save the country. It's not a call to arms, but it might as well be. The words land heavy, electric. You can feel the air shift. You follow the crowd as it spills out into the cold. Torches flare. There's laughter now, strangely calm, almost festive. Some men begin daubing soot on their faces, wrapping themselves in rough blankets, feathers sticking out at odd angles. Mohawks tonight, one says, grinning. It's half disguise, half mockery. A historian centuries later would call it the most polite act of vandalism ever committed. You can't help but smirk at the thought. They move in silence toward the harbor, boots crunching against the frost. You follow, heart thudding softly in rhythm. At the docks the ships wait, still dark, unaware of what's coming. Then the first man climbs aboard, steady as a shadow. Others follow. Axes glint briefly under the moonlight. The first chest hits the water with a muffled splash, then another and another, until the harbor begins to shimmer with the strange glint of floating leaves. No one steals. No one hurts anyone. The men even sweep the decks afterward, leaving everything but the tea untouched. It's rebellion with manners, insurrection with impeccable tidiness. If revolutions had a tea etiquette, this would be it. From the shore, the crowd watches in silence, breath fogging in the cold. You can hear the soft rhythm of the crates breaking open, the hiss of tea spilling into the black water. The scent is faint, but there, a ghostly wisp of earth and bitterness carried by the wind. Somewhere a woman whispers, "Smells like freedom." By morning, the harbor looks strange, dark water tinged with brown, as if the sea itself has steeped overnight. The British officials are furious. London newspapers will soon call it an act of barbarity. But here, people wake up feeling lighter, as though they've finally taken a breath after years of holding it in. You walk through the streets, hearing fragments of conversation. Pride, fear, uncertainty. We've gone too far. Maybe not far enough. What happens now? The answers, of course, are still years away, and they'll cost more than anyone can imagine. Back in London, men in wigs spill tea onto their ledgers when they read the reports. Boston? Again? They mutter, trying to make sense of it. Some demand punishment, others call for restraint. But the truth is, the empire doesn't know how to listen to anger that's been steeped too long. Historians still argue about whether the Boston Tea Party was inevitable. Some say it was the spark of destiny, others that it was just bad management and worse diplomacy. But you can't shake the feeling that something larger was brewing all along, that the real rebellion wasn't in the harbor, but in the quiet realization that people could choose not to obey. Later that night, as you walk along the water, you see faint ripples glimmering under the stars. The smell of tea still lingers faintly, like memory. You crouch down, dip your hand into the cold water. It's almost poetic, the taste of defiance, faintly bitter, impossibly brave. A breeze sweeps through the harbor, carrying whispers of what's to come. Lexington, Concord, Independence. But for now, the night is still, the water dark, and the stars seem to shimmer like tiny flecks of spilled tea across the sky. You close your eyes and imagine London's polished teacups shattering one by one across the ocean, replaced by rough mugs and firelight. The sound is quiet but final, like the end of a ritual. The Empire's favorite brew has just turned into something far stronger. The air in Boston still smells faintly of salt and rebellion. You linger by the docks where the tea once floated like ghosts, and the water feels heavier now, like it remembers. But time, as it always does, moves on, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant thunder. Soon the protests turn to petitions, and the petitions turn to gunfire. The leaf that once brought calm now rustles in the storm of liberty. You walk along a dirt road that winds through the colonies. It's early spring 1775, and the trees are just beginning to bud again, small green flecks against the grey sky. Farmers talk quietly over fences. Blacksmiths hammer in rhythm that sounds suspiciously like preparation. The colonies, once just scattered towns, begin to thrum with a strange collective heartbeat. You feel it in the air, something's changing, something restless and irreversible. When the first shots crack at Lexington and Concord, they sound like the snapping of dry twigs, but history would call it the shot heard round the world. You weren't there to see the smoke curl above the fields, but you can imagine it. A dawn mist, men clutching muskets with trembling hands, the faint echo of drums, and someone's teapot left cooling on the hearth. Wars never begin grandly. They start quietly, with people simply deciding they've had enough. In kitchens across the colonies, kettles still whistle. Even as soldiers march, mothers steep herbs for courage. Fathers sip what little tea remains before switching reluctantly to coffee. Yes, coffee, the bitter cousin of tea, hastily adopted out of protest. It becomes a badge of rebellion, a liquid declaration. We no longer drink what the king drinks. You taste it once, dark, sharp, far too earnest, and can't help but think freedom sometimes requires a less pleasant brew. There's irony in it all. Tea, the very symbol of comfort and refinement, has now become a symbol of oppression. And the Americans, ever resourceful, find new rituals. They boil dandelions, chicory, even roasted barley, each cup a small defiance. Historians still debate whether this new coffee patriotism was genuine or just caffeine withdrawal in disguise. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Britain tightens its grip. The king's ministers sip their morning tea in gilded rooms, muttering about loyalty and treason. They don't yet understand that you can't tax the idea of freedom. You can tax leaves, yes, but not the spirit that grows wild in the hearts of those who drink them. You travel now with the Continental Army, though army is a generous word. More like a band of farmers, blacksmiths, and dreamers wearing mismatched coats. The air smells of sweat, gunpowder, and damp wool. Around campfires, soldiers whisper about home, about letters that never arrive, about the taste of tea they once had. One man offers you a tin mug filled with muddy brown liquid. It ain't much, he says, grinning, but it's liberty in a cup. You sip it. It's terrible. But he's right. It tastes like hope disguised as smoke. In moments of calm, when musket fire fades and the stars return, the soldiers brew their makeshift tea. Wild mint, spruce needles, anything green and vaguely fragrant. It's more ceremony than comfort. The warmth spreads slowly through your hands, and you realize that even now, amid the chaos, people need rituals, something to hold on to when the world shifts beneath their feet. Back in London, the politicians grow restless. Pamphlets fly, opinions clash like swords. Some argue that the colonists will crawl back as soon as their cupboards run dry. Others warn that an idea once steeped can't be unsteeped. You imagine them in their powdered wigs, pouring tea with trembling hands, their cups rattling softly on saucers. Perhaps the empire feels its own kind of fear now, the fear of losing something it believed eternal. And yet the war drags on. You move through the seasons, snow over Valley Forge, summer haze over Yorktown, rain-soaked roads lined with weary feet. You hear laughter sometimes, strangely bright amidst the hunger. Freedom, it turns out, has a sense of humor. Like when soldiers discover that British tea rations have been captured and decide to hold a mock royal tea party in the mud, complete with toasts to His Majesty's foolishness. One man lifts his cup and says, "May our next drink be in a free land." Another adds, "Preferably something stronger." Everyone laughs. And for a moment, the war feels distant, almost manageable. But freedom doesn't come overnight. It brews slowly, unevenly, like a pot left too long over the fire. When the war finally ends and the Treaty of Paris is signed, you can almost hear the sigh ripple across the ocean. In taverns and kitchens, mugs are raised again, not in defiance this time, but in weary celebration. In the new United States, coffee remains the drink of choice for a while. Tea is seen as unpatriotic, a lingering reminder of redcoats and taxes. But habits have long roots. Slowly, quietly, tea returns. It sneaks back into cupboards, reappears at breakfast tables. No longer a symbol of empire, it's just comfort again, a warm, familiar friend that people missed more than they admitted. You sit on a porch somewhere in Virginia, watching the dusk settle over fields that once echoed with war. Fireflies blink like slow embers. An old man pours himself a cup of tea, the steam curling lazily into the evening air. He raises it slightly toward you. "Funny thing," he says, "we fought to be free, but in the end I still like my tea." You smile. Maybe that's the point. Freedom means choosing for yourself, even if it's the same choice you made before. The leaf, once tangled in rebellion, now drifts gently into peace. It's been crushed, burned, and thrown into harbors, yet it survives like the people who fought under its shadow. You realize history isn't just battles and treaties. It's also what people drink afterward, what they whisper over cups, what they remember when the world finally quiets. The night deepens. You tilt your head and listen, the soft clink of a spoon against porcelain. the murmur of voices carried by the wind. Somewhere far away, another kettle sings. Steam curls up like a ghost of the past, delicate and unstoppable. You take a slow breath, feeling the warmth spread through you again. The war may be over, but the story of tea is far from finished. It's already drifting eastward once more, toward new gardens, new empires, and new hungers. You follow its trail, curious where it will steep next. Hey guys, tonight we're continuing our gentle journey through the story of tea. And we're entering a time of polished boots, fluttering flags, and the scent of empire in the air. So let's settle in, maybe light a candle, sip your own cup, and let's drift together to the age when tea was not just a drink, but a weapon wrapped in silk and ceremony. Imagine London in the 18th century. The city hums with a rhythm both elegant and uneasy. The creak of carriages, the chatter of markets, the murmur of parlours where teacups clink like tiny bells of civilization. The empire is swelling. Its red-coated soldiers and merchant ships reach across the oceans like long arms, gathering spices, silks, and, of course, leaves. And those leaves? They were gold. Not the shiny kind you could mold into crowns, but the soft, fragrant kind that vanished into hot water and turned it amber. The British East India Company was the gatekeeper of this gold. Imagine enormous wooden ships, their hulls packed with tea chests, rocking over grey-green waves from Canton to London. It was a voyage of months, perilous and costly. Yet when those crates finally arrived, the city's heart quickened. Tea became the empire's quiet obsession. Picture a grand London townhouse. Candles flicker, gowns rustle, and in the drawing room, a silver teapot gleams beside a small blue and white porcelain cup. Chinese, of course, because porcelain was just as exotic and desired as the tea itself. A lady of fashion pours, wrist delicate, conversation soft. She knows that tea is more than refreshment. It's refinement, it's identity. To drink tea was to declare oneself part of a new world of taste and manners. Even the way one held the cup, 2 fingers and a thumb, never grasping the handle, carried social weight. But while the upper classes sipped, the empire's wheels turned elsewhere. In the east, British traders pushed harder and deeper into China's tightly controlled ports. The Qing dynasty, dignified and cautious, allowed foreign merchants to trade only in Canton and only under strict rules. The Chinese didn't want the West's textiles or clocks. They wanted silver. So silver flowed out of Britain like water, exchanged for tea. Millions of pounds of it. London grew anxious. Something had to change. That something would soon ripple across oceans and generations. But for now, in the drawing rooms of England, no one could imagine that this fragrant leaf, so light it could float in your palm, would one day ignite wars. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the colonies had developed their own taste for the brew. Tea was everywhere, in Boston taverns, New York parlors, Philadelphia kitchens. To refuse tea was almost unthinkable, but the colonies had begun to question something deeper than taste: power. Who ruled them, and at what cost? And so when Parliament decided to tax tea again, the air thickened like steam from a pot left boiling too long. The red-coated soldiers who patrolled colonial streets were symbols of British might, but also of British arrogance. Each polished button gleamed with the message, "You are ours." Tea, the once innocent comfort of home, had become political. Let's drift to a cold Boston evening. Snow muffles the streets, lanterns glow in the windows, and inside a small tavern a group of men whisper. You can almost smell the tea on their breath, and the anger too. They speak of liberty, of unfair taxes, of ships anchored in the harbor, heavy with chests of tea no one wants to buy. Outside, soldiers in red coats stomp their boots against the chill, muskets gleaming. Inside, revolution brews. Those men, some in rough coats, others in respectable waistcoats, plan an act that will echo across centuries. They will dress as Mohawk warriors. They will climb aboard those ships, and they will throw the empire's prized leaf into the sea. The Boston Tea Party was more than rebellion. It was a declaration that even the smallest thing, a leaf, a cup, a habit once, could become a symbol of freedom. But before that famous night, before the splash of the chests and the salt and fury, there was tension thick as smoke. The redcoats patrolled the docks. The colonists avoided their gaze. Every teacup lifted in public felt like a statement, loyalty or defiance depending on the eyes watching. In London, Parliament called the colonists ungrateful. In the colonies, people whispered the word tyranny, and so, over tea, an empire began to crack. Imagine the irony. While London's aristocrats enjoyed their serene afternoon tea, halfway across the world, that same drink was sparking revolution. In one place, tea meant order, civility, empire. In another, it meant resistance, independence, identity. The same leaf. Two meanings. As the steam rose from porcelain cups, so did history, invisible, swirling, unstoppable. So tonight, as you sip your own tea, think of those red coats gleaming in the lantern light, standing guard over crates of leaves that would soon be tossed into the sea. Think of how small things, quiet, fragrant things, can sometimes tip the scales of history. And remember, every empire begins with a cup, and sometimes it ends with one too. Hey guys, tonight we're sinking deeper into the darker currents of our tea story, where the calm surface of a porcelain cup hides stormy waters beneath. So pour yourself something warm, take a slow breath, and let's drift back to a century when tea wasn't just a comfort. It was the currency of empires and the cause of addiction, deceit, and war. The 19th century dawned like steam rising from a pot, hazy and full of promise. Britain stood tall, its empire vast, its red coats now familiar on maps across the globe. And at the center of all this global rhythm was tea, that delicate, fragrant leaf that had captured a nation's heart. But the British had a problem. They were hopelessly addicted. The daily ritual of tea had moved from luxury to necessity. It wasn't just for the rich now. Every dock worker, every maid, every soldier wanted their morning cup. And every pound of it still came from China. China, however, didn't need much from Britain. They had silk, porcelain, and tea, treasures the world craved. But what could the British offer in return? Their wool? Their clocks? Their industrial goods? The Chinese emperors and merchants politely declined. "We have everything we need," they said. So Britain paid in silver, river after river of it, flowing eastward, draining the empire's coffers. London merchants fretted. Politicians fumed. Something had to be done, and so they found something dark. Let's linger for a moment on that word, opium, a flower that blooms beautifully, its petals soft as whispers, and inside a sap that soothes pain and bends minds. The British didn't invent opium, but they perfected its trade. They grew it in India, their colonial jewel, and shipped it east to China, quietly, illegally. The logic was cold and simple. If the Chinese wouldn't buy British goods, they could be made to buy British vice. And when they became addicted, well, trade would balance itself. Imagine it, sleek wooden ships gliding into Chinese ports at night, holds packed with crates of the poppy's poison. Silver began to flow back from China this time. The coffers of London refilled, but the cost was incalculable. In China, addiction spread like a mist. From merchants to farmers, soldiers to scholars, opium seeped into daily life. The Qing officials watched their people crumble. Their economy unraveled. Tea, porcelain, silk, once symbols of China's refinement, now floated on rivers tainted with opium smoke. One man, Commissioner Lin Zexu, stood up against it. He wrote to Queen Victoria herself, appealing to her conscience. "Surely your Majesty would not wish her subjects to poison mine." But conscience in the age of empire was a fragile thing. In 1839, Commissioner Lin took bold action. He ordered the destruction of opium stockpiles in Canton, tens of thousands of chests, worth millions in silver, seized and dumped into the sea. The British were outraged. "Our property," they cried. "Our rights." And so began the First Opium War. Imagine cannon fire echoing along the Chinese coast, British ships, ironclad, smoke-belching, facing wooden junks that splintered like kindling. It wasn't a war of equals. It was a war of pride, profit, and power disguised as trade. By 1842, the Qing Empire was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking, the first of many unequal treaties. They ceded Hong Kong, opened ports, and paid massive reparations, all for tea and opium. Pause for a moment and think of the irony. The West had fallen in love with the calm, civilized ritual of tea, that gentle sip, that pause in the afternoon. Yet the leaf's journey had led to gunfire, addiction, and colonization. The steam rising from a London teapot was mirrored by the smoke of opium dens in Canton. A quiet cup on one side of the world, chaos on the other. Porcelain tells this story too. In those same years, English factories began to imitate Chinese porcelain, perfecting their own fine bone china. The English tea set became a symbol of domestic order, delicate, pure. But behind every dainty teacup lay the shadow of empire, a porcelain dream glazed with violence and contradiction. Tea had become more than a drink. It was a mirror. It reflected everything, the beauty of human connection and the ugliness of human greed. Let's wander for a moment through a London parlour in 1840. The fire crackles. A woman in lace pours tea from a bone china pot, her hand steady. She speaks of poetry, politics, and the faraway troubles in China. The conversation flows easily, elegant, refined. She doesn't know, or perhaps doesn't care, that the silver spoon stirring her tea was paid for by the ruin of distant lives. History has a way of hiding its stains beneath the linen of civility. By the mid-19th century, tea had conquered the West completely. But the empire that held it together was beginning to shift. The seeds of resistance were being sown in India, where farmers toiled in the sun to grow opium and later tea for their British masters. In China, where resentment simmered beneath humiliation, the leaf that once connected worlds was now dividing them. So tonight, as you sip your own cup, maybe think of that strange paradox. How something so peaceful could have come from so much pain. The porcelain smooth beneath your fingers once symbolized the perfection of trade, but also the cost of power. And if you listen closely, maybe you can still hear the echo, the whisper of sails in the South China Sea, the clink of silver coins, the soft crack of a teacup in a London drawing room, because tea, my friend, has always carried more than flavor. It carries memory. You might think, after all that chaos, the story of tea and opium would cool down, like a pot left to steep too long, growing bitter but calm. But no, the leaves hadn't settled yet. The war we just touched upon, that sharp, stinging brew between Britain and China, didn't simply end with a treaty. It lingered. It thickened. So it steeped too long. It's the 1840s, and the South China Sea is heavy with the smell of salt, gunpowder, and loss. The First Opium War had ended, yes, but the taste it left was acrid. China had been forced to open its ports to trade, to cede Hong Kong, to allow foreigners into its cities, all while its people were drowning in addiction. And in London? Politicians congratulated themselves over tea. Newspapers called it a victory for free trade, though the freedom in question was the right to sell poison. The irony is so thick you could pour it with cream. The thing about empires is that they're like impatient tea drinkers. They don't know when to stop pouring. Britain's thirst for profit didn't fade with one treaty. It deepened. So when tensions flared again, over diplomats, smugglers, and opium bans still being defied, and another storm began to brew. The Second Opium War, yes. There was another. Georgia erupted in 1856. By then, both sides had changed, and so had the world. The Qing dynasty was weaker, its bureaucracy crumbling under internal rebellions. Britain, flush with industry and arrogance, had a new ally, France. Together they moved against China with a precision that was as chilling as it was effective. You picture the ships first, sleek, iron-hulled steamers cutting through the waters like knives through silk. Their cannons gleamed, their flags snapping in the monsoon wind. Behind them came troops in red and blue coats, marching with the rhythm of drums and empire. They called it the Arrow Incident, a dispute over a small Chinese ship accused of piracy. But really it was just an excuse, a match struck near dry tinder. Within weeks, Canton burned again. Back in the Forbidden City, Emperor Xianfeng could feel his dynasty unraveling thread by thread. He was a scholar more than a soldier, fond of poetry, music, and ritual. But poems couldn't stop gunboats. When British and French forces pushed north toward Beijing, his court panicked. In 1860, they reached the gates of the imperial capital. The foreigners had come not for land this time, not only at least, but for something far more symbolic: submission. What followed still feels like a scar carved in porcelain. The invaders looted the old summer palace, Yuanming Yuan, a place so breathtaking that even European visitors had called it the Garden of Gardens. Marble bridges, jade fountains, scrolls painted with centuries of beauty, all burned. Soldiers stole jewels, statues, clocks. They even took peacocks. Imagine that, the empire that had given the world tea and porcelain reduced to ash and smoke, its treasures stuffed into cargo holds bound for London and Paris. The war ended soon after, on paper at least. Another set of unequal treaties was signed. China was forced to legalize opium, pay more indemnities and open more ports. The British drank their victory, quite literally, in fresh shipments of tea, unaware that the very fields producing it would soon shift to new lands under their control. Because tea, like power, always finds new soil. While China licked its wounds, British eyes turned toward India. They had learned a dangerous lesson. Dependence on a single supplier was risky, so they began to plant tea on the misty hills of Assam and Darjeeling, then in the rolling highlands of Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. It's strange to think of how this came about. The very war that broke China's sovereignty also birthed the global tea industry. From ruin came rows of green. From smoke came steam. In Assam, laborers worked in punishing heat, plucking leaves under the watch of colonial overseers. Many were brought from distant villages, bound by debt, exhaustion, or both. They didn't sip tea in the evenings. They harvested it for others to enjoy. The same empire that preached civility over afternoon tea built that ritual on the backs of unseen workers. There's something haunting in that thought, isn't there? You can almost see it. A fine London salon glowing in candlelight, delicate cups clinking, laughter spilling through the air. And somewhere far away under a different sun, brown hands move silently through rows of bushes, the leaves sticking to their sweat. That's the duality of empire. One world of gentility, another of endless labor. Some historians still debate whether the opium wars were about commerce or morality or simple arrogance, but maybe they were about something quieter, the human desire to control what comforts us. We crave warmth, order, flavor, and yet our greed to possess those things can scorch the very ground they grow from. By the time the wars ended, China's century of humiliation had begun, a phrase still used today. Ports once guarded with pride were now dotted with foreign flags. Missionaries preached, merchants prospered, and opium dens multiplied. And yet, amid all that ruin, tea still flowed. The Chinese continued to drink it, not out of submission but memory. Tea remained their anchor, a small act of peace in a sea of loss. When the world around you is collapsing, maybe the simple act of pouring hot water over leaves becomes an act of defiance. You might imagine that back in Britain, few people cared about the war's moral weight. The headlines faded quickly. There were new inventions, new colonies, new fads. The telegraph was spreading. Railways stretched like veins across continents, and London shops displayed mountains of porcelain and silk. But every so often, someone, a poet, a politician, a wife of a missionary, would question it all. Was it worth it? Was this the price of progress? Even now, historians still debate. Some argue that the opium wars were inevitable, a clash of cultures, an accident of commerce. Others say it was greed, pure and simple, hidden beneath the polite language of trade. You can almost hear the question steeping in the air. How long before something pure turns bitter? And that's why this part of our story feels different. It's quieter, sadder. A reminder that history doesn't always explode in battle. Sometimes it just lingers like a pot forgotten on the stove. The leaves keep steeping, the flavor darkens, and no one knows quite how to pour it out without burning their hands. The war that steeped too long wasn't just fought with cannons. It was fought with words, addiction, and denial. And it left a flavor that still lingers in the world's cup. So as you sit there now, maybe with your own tea cooling beside you, think of the strange balance it represents. Peace and conflict, warmth and exploitation, comfort and history intertwined. The leaf that soothes also remembers. Now take another slow breath. The story's still unfolding. Next, we'll follow those same leaves as they travel to new lands, to gardens of empire and fields that would change the world's morning rituals forever. You can almost feel the air shift now, away from the smoke of war and into something greener, softer. The cannons are quiet, the treaties signed, and all across Asia the scent of damp soil rises as dawn creeps through the mist. The British Empire, still humming from its victories and greed, turns its gaze to the hills. The question now isn't how to win tea from China, but how to grow it for themselves. You find yourself walking through the lush slopes of Assam, the morning dew clinging to your boots. The air hums with insects and the low rustle of leaves in the wind. This isn't the calm serenity of a Chinese tea garden. It's wilder, thicker, the forest barely tamed. Somewhere in that tangle of roots and rain, the empire's next great obsession begins to take root. It started with a discovery, or maybe a misunderstanding. Around 1823, a Scottish adventurer named Robert Bruce stumbled upon a tribe in Assam who were already brewing a dark, bitter infusion from local plants. Not the delicate green teas of Fujian, but something stronger, earthier, a drink made from Camellia sinensis var. Assamica. He realized, perhaps before anyone else, that the British didn't need to rely on China after all. The plant had been here all along, growing under their noses. Bruce died before he could see the idea bloom, but his brother Charles took the seeds, literally and figuratively, and carried them to Calcutta. From there, experiments began. Gardens were mapped. Slopes were cleared. The East India Company, ever eager for profit, poured resources into the soil. You can almost picture it. Surveyors in pith helmets sketching outlines under the sun. Bengali laborers hacking through vines, elephants dragging timber. Every patch of green that had once belonged to jungle now shimmered with rows of tea. But the process wasn't gentle. It rarely is when empires plant their dreams. Workers were brought in from villages hundreds of miles away, men, women, even children, lured by promises of wages they would never quite earn. They lived in crowded barracks, slept on mats, and worked from dawn until their hands blistered. You hear the sound of it, the snip of shears, the murmur of exhaustion, the hiss of boiling leaves in tin vats. For every fragrant cup poured in London, there was a day of labor under the Indian sun, and yet amid all that hardship something beautiful grew. The hills of Assam and Darjeeling began to glow with a soft, almost holy green. Mist rolled through like breath. From the distance, the plantations looked like vast tapestries stitched by the sky. Darjeeling, the name itself sounds like a sigh. Perched high in the Himalayas, its air is cool and thin, almost weightless. British botanists called it the champagne of teas, though you suspect the locals simply called it survival. The combination of altitude, rain, and soil made its flavor distinct. Lighter, floral, slightly musky, like mountain wind trapped in a cup. It's said that the earliest seedlings were smuggled from China, hidden in the luggage of botanists, and disguised as innocent plants. A few survived the long sea journey, their roots curling like clenched fists. When they were finally planted in Indian soil, something miraculous happened. They thrived, and so the empire had its new Eden. By the 1850s and 60s, tea had become more than just a drink. It was the lifeblood of British industry. Steamships carried it down the Brahmaputra River. Trains rattled through jungles to Calcutta, and warehouses overflowed with chests stamped Assam and Darjeeling. It was empire in a cup, fragrant, disciplined, and immensely profitable. But let's not forget Ceylon. That's where the empire learned that even disaster could be turned to advantage. In the 1860s, Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, was covered in coffee plantations, the pride of colonial agriculture. Then came a fungus, Hemilia vastatrix, or simply coffee rust, and within a few short years it wiped out nearly every crop. The fields stood brown and broken. So the British did what they always did best. They replaced one addiction with another. They tore out the dead coffee plants and filled the gaps with tea bushes. And the island's hills, kissed by monsoon clouds, became some of the most productive in the empire. By the 1890s, Ceylon tea was a global brand, sold in tins adorned with elegant ladies and steamships. Still, there was a darker undercurrent beneath all this golden marketing. The colonial tea system wasn't just about crops, it was about control. The planters were often British men, managing estates that looked more like feudal kingdoms than farms. The workers were local, Tamil, Sinhalese, Assamese, and bound to contracts they could rarely escape. Each morning, the bell rang before dawn. Women tied cloths over their heads, slung baskets across their backs, and moved in single file through the mist. Their fingers moved fast, practiced, almost hypnotic. Pluck the bud, 2 leaves and a shoot over and over again, hundreds of times before breakfast. If you close your eyes, you can hear the soft rhythms, pluck, drop, the heartbeat of empire disguised as serenity. And yet, the story isn't entirely bleak. Tea also built bridges, sometimes unintentionally. Indian entrepreneurs began to enter the trade, first as brokers, later as owners. Local scientists learned to study soil, climate, fermentation. The plant that had once symbolized foreign control slowly rooted itself into Indian identity. Today, Assam and Darjeeling aren't just colonial names, they're places of pride. The same hills that once echoed with the cries of laborers now hum with festivals, songs, and laughter. The people who pick the leaves now often sell them too. History, it seems, has a way of being composted. Pain turns into something fertile, given time. Back in England, the empire's teacups overflowed. Tea had become more than a luxury. It was a necessity. The working class drank it by the gallon, sweetened with sugar from the Caribbean. The upper class drank it in porcelain cups painted with gold. Through it all, the empire congratulated itself on its civilized achievement, never tasting the sweat behind the flavor. But sometimes, in moments of quiet honesty, a few did notice. There were travelers and writers who described the haunting beauty of the plantations, the strange mix of paradise and hardship. One even wrote, "It is a pity that the sweetest leaves grow from the deepest wounds." You stand there now in your mind's eye, amid the rolling green. The sun dips low, casting long shadows across the rows of tea bushes. Somewhere a bell rings at the end of the workday. Women pour back toward their quarters, laughter mingling with fatigue. A child chases a firefly. The day ends like any other, but you feel something in the air, a quiet endurance, an unspoken strength. The empire believed it had conquered tea, but perhaps in truth tea had conquered it, softening its edge, weaving itself into every household, every morning ritual, every sigh of comfort. The leaves had traveled so far, from misty Chinese mountains to Indian hills, from emperors to factory workers, yet somehow they still tasted of both peace and defiance. And as the mist curls once more around the tea gardens of empire, you take another slow breath. The story isn't finished yet. From these plantations will rise the age of manners, rituals and porcelain teacups, where every gesture at the table meant something, and even the angle of your pinky could signal your class. The empire's gardens have bloomed. Next, we step into its drawing rooms. The clinking of porcelain cups became the quiet heartbeat of an empire. In the gaslit parlors of London, where lace curtains softened the light and whispers carried farther than shouts, tea reigned as both ritual and revelation. It was no longer just a drink, it was theater. Every pour, every delicate stir of the spoon, played its part in the choreography of class, propriety, and power. By the mid-19th century, Britain had become a nation steeped, literally, in tea. The aristocracy had turned it into an art, the middle class into a declaration of refinement, and even the working poor into a brief blessed reprieve from the grind of factories and soot. Tea was democracy disguised as delicacy. Whether served in gilded cups or chipped mugs, it promised a moment of calm in an age of smoke and steel. Yet beneath the genteel rustle of skirts and the polite chatter of drawing rooms, darker brews stirred. The empire that prided itself on civility had built its comfort on coercion. Every teaspoon of sugar came from Caribbean plantations, each leaf from fields in Assam or Ceylon, worked by brown hands under white overseers. The tea that soothed London's nerves had been carried across seas patrolled by gunboats. In Mayfair, Lady Arabella Wentworth poured her guests a blend she swore came directly from the Himalayas. "Darjeeling," she whispered, "the champagne of teas." Her friends gasped appreciatively, unaware that the plants had been stolen from China decades earlier, smuggled out by botanists disguised as monks. The empire's greatest thefts wore the mask of scientific curiosity. Meanwhile, in the damp tenements of East London, factory girls clutched their tin cups of tea like holy relics. For them, it wasn't about taste or prestige, it was survival. Tea killed the taste of dirty water, staved off hunger, and gave enough energy to last another shift at the loom. The same empire that exported tea to the world imported exhaustion to its own people. Still, tea had become the common tongue. A builder might share a cup with his wife before the day's labor, while the Queen herself sipped from fine porcelain as she read reports from Calcutta or Hong Kong. Every stratum of society steeped in the same ritual, bound by the same invisible threads of empire. Afternoon tea, now the signature of Victorian grace, was not a creation of monarchs, but of hunger. Anna, Duchess of Bedford, found herself faint between luncheon and supper. Rather than suffer in silence, she summoned bread, butter, and tea to her room. What began as a private indulgence became a national institution. Soon, every respectable household followed suit. Tea at 4 declared the new social law, but with every new ritual came new rules. Milk first or last, sugar or lemon, loose leaf or bag, though the bag, of course, was yet to come. Entire reputations could hinge on such trivialities. To pour milk before tea, said some, was vulgar, a habit of servants. To add it after, said others, risked cracking the fine china. Even the smallest gesture became a badge of belonging or exclusion. Tea also shaped women's lives in quiet rebellion. In drawing rooms, women found spaces to speak freely away from men's ears. Tea tables became miniature parliaments, where marriages were arranged, charities planned, and gossip, sharp as any dagger, was exchanged. In that swirl of sugar and scandal, women exercised soft power long before they could vote. And then came the empire's new obsession, tea rooms. Unlike taverns, they were respectable places for women to gather without chaperones, to discuss literature, fashion, or politics over steaming cups. In their modest way, tea rooms brewed social change. They became the cradle of early suffragette meetings, their saucers rattling not just from spoons, but from the tremors of revolution to come. The Victorians loved to mask their desires behind civility, yet tea betrayed them. In the novels of Austen, Bronte, and Dickens, tea symbolized comfort, flirtation, or hypocrisy, depending on who poured and who declined. A cup of tea could be an invitation to intimacy, or a weapon of passive aggression. The clink of a teaspoon could say what words dared not. Even as London refined its rituals, its colonies bore the cost. In Assam, laborers cleared the jungle under brutal monsoons, their hands stained by both mud and blood. Overseers recorded the yield in ledgers, never the lives lost. The empire measured its success not in human welfare, but in pounds of leaf and profit per acre. Still, propaganda poured as freely as tea itself. Posters extolled the virtues of imperial trade, urging Britons to drink the empire's tea as a patriotic duty. The irony went unnoticed, or perhaps was simply ignored. To sip was to support civilization, or so they were told. Few paused to ask, whose civilization and at what cost? In Buckingham Palace, Queen Victoria herself was said to prefer Darjeeling with milk, though she often drank it while reading telegrams of unrest from India. Tea soothed the conscience even as it symbolized control. The Queen's empire stretched across continents, and in each, tea both connected and divided her subjects. By century's end, Britain was awash in tea. Imports had quadrupled, and companies like Twinings, Lipton, and Brook Bond turned leaves into empires of their own. Supermarkets had not yet come, but the foundations of global branding were already there. Neat tins, elegant logos, the promise of purity wrapped around the machinery of exploitation. And yet, despite its contradictions, tea united more than it divided. In a nation fractured by class, gender, and industrial upheaval, it offered a fragile sense of continuity. A cup of tea after tragedy before work, during gossip at funerals. It was the constant in an age of chaos. There's something haunting in that thought. The Victorians, masters of industry and hypocrisy alike, found in tea a mirror of themselves, delicate yet domineering, fragrant yet steeped in suffering. Each sip carried both comfort and complicity. If you listen closely, even now you can almost hear it, the faint clatter of teaspoons, the whisper of steam rising from a silver pot. The empire is gone, but the ritual remains. And in that ritual, timeless, trembling, tender, we still taste the afterglow of Victorian dreams. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world's teapots were no longer confined to drawing rooms and duchesses. The steam that once whispered through the parlours of London now rose from factory canteens, railway stations, and colonial outposts. Tea had become not just a symbol of empire, it was its bloodstream, pumping through every port, every household, every hour of the day. The Victorians had built an empire on leaves, and the Edwardians inherited it with pride. Yet something was shifting beneath the surface. The world was speeding up. Telegraphs chattered across continents, railways stitched the globe together, and ships ran on coal instead of wind. The genteel ceremony of afternoon tea could no longer keep pace with the tempo of modernity. In offices from Manchester to Calcutta, Clerks abandoned the porcelain and lace for mugs and tin kettles. The tea break, a pause between the monotony of paperwork or the roar of machines, became an institution of its own. No matter how relentless the workday, there was always time to put the kettle on. It was democracy in a cup, a ritual that belonged to everyone, no matter their station. Yet behind this comforting routine, commerce was transforming the very nature of tea. Enter Thomas Lipton, a grocer's son from Glasgow who turned tea from luxury to livelihood. Lipton saw what few others did. The future of tea lay not in exclusivity but accessibility. By cutting out the middlemen, buying plantations in Ceylon, and selling directly to consumers, he created the world's first true global tea brand. His slogan, "Direct from the tea garden to the teapot," was both business strategy and moral theatre. Lipton wrapped his product in cheerful yellow packaging, stamped it with promises of purity, and advertised it to the masses. He didn't just sell tea, he sold aspiration. To sip Lipton's blend was to participate in the modern world, a world of progress, hygiene, and efficiency. No fuss, no ceremony, just convenience in a canister. Convenience soon became the new creed. As the century advanced, the tea bag was born, not in Britain but in America. In 1908, New York merchant Thomas Sullivan sent out samples of tea in small silk bags. His clients, misunderstanding the packaging, dunked the bags directly into their cups. A mistake became an innovation. The ritual of measuring loose leaves gave way to the quick dip of a sachet. Time, once an ingredient of flavor, became the enemy. Tea, that patient art of waiting and steeping, now yielded to modern impatience. Factories adapted, advertisements proliferated, and brands multiplied. Brook Bond Red Label, Tetley, PG Tips. Each promised not just taste but reliability, the industrialization of comfort. The empire had conquered nature. Now it sought to standardize pleasure. Meanwhile, the colonies where tea grew were changing too, but not always by choice. In India and Ceylon, British planters ruled vast estates like miniature kingdoms. They built railways to move tea faster, ports to ship it farther, and barracks to house the laborers who picked the leaves from dawn to dusk. Wages were meager, freedom scarce. The golden age of British tea rested on the bent backs of invisible hands, but whispers of independence were brewing. In the cool hills of Assam and the highlands of Sri Lanka, workers began to talk of rights, of dignity, of ownership. The same global networks that had carried tea now carried ideas. Revolution, like caffeine, was in the bloodstream. Back in Britain, the First World War steeped the nation in sacrifice. Soldiers at the front found solace in enamel mugs of scalding, overbrewed tea. Amid mud and misery, that bitter warmth was a reminder of home, of humanity. The government understood its power. Tea became an essential supply, rationed, distributed, honored. Tea, one soldier wrote in his diary, is the difference between despair and duty. After the war, tea symbolized rebuilding. Londoners returned to their routines, clutching their cups like talismans against the uncertainty of peace. Tea rooms filled again, not with gossip but gratitude. Yet the world had changed. Women had joined the workforce. Colonies demanded their voices, and the empire's moral veneer had begun to crack. Then came another storm, the Great Depression. For millions, tea was the last affordable comfort. When bread was scarce and wages low, people still found coins for a few leaves. A pot of tea could stretch across an evening, filling bellies as much as hearts. Advertisers leaned into this resilience. Keep calm and put the kettle on. By the Second World War, tea was once again at the front lines. The British Ministry of Food declared it an essential morale booster. Convoys braved U-boats to deliver it from Ceylon, and canteens brewed it by the gallon. Soldiers, sailors, factory workers, all were united by the same cup. When London burned during the Blitz, volunteers handed out tea to survivors amid the rubble. Smoke, dust, and tea, it was the flavor of endurance. When the empire finally began to dissolve after 1945, tea survived its collapse. India and Sri Lanka gained independence, yet their plantations continued to feed the British market. Old hierarchies persisted under new management. The empire's shadow still lingered in every export invoice and supermarket shelf. At home, post-war Britain found itself rationing tea until 1952. When it finally ended, the celebration was muted, more weary than jubilant. The British people had learned to live without sugar, butter, and hope, but never without tea. It had become more than habit, it was identity. By the 1960s, the world was unrecognizable. The empire was gone, television had arrived, and youth were turning from tea to coffee, the new symbol of cosmopolitan rebellion. Espresso bars replaced tea rooms. Jazz replaced string quartets. Yet in living rooms across the country, kettles still hissed. Old women in curlers and young men in suits still found common ground over a cup. In Japan, green tea found new global fame through Zen and minimalism. In China, after decades of turmoil, ancient tea traditions revived, delicate as spring shoots. And in the West, tea began to reinvent itself. No longer just black leaves in boiling water, but an exploration. Herbal, iced, spiced, smoked. The modern palate rediscovered what the empire had forgotten: diversity. By the end of the 20th century, tea was no longer imperial, it was international. A drink that had once divided nations now connected them. From London's rain to Marrakesh's mint-scented alleys, from Tokyo's tatami rooms to New York's glass cafes, tea became a conversation rather than a command. Still, something of its old soul remains. Every time we pour a cup, we echo centuries of hands that planted, plucked, packed, and poured before us. The empire's machinery may have rusted, but its rituals endure. And as the 21st century dawns, with its algorithms and anxiety, perhaps tea is once again what it was at the beginning: a pause. A moment of warmth in a world too fast to feel. A reminder, however faint, that history can still be held in your hands, steeped in quiet reflection. For in every cup, no matter how modern the packaging, how hurried the brewing, there lingers a whisper from the past: be still, breathe, let the leaves unfold. You might think you know tea now. Green, black, maybe a chamomile bag you forgot in your mug for too long. But the world of tea, my friend, once shimmered with far stranger colors. Beyond the supermarket shelves and the Instagram teapots, there existed blends so peculiar, so specific to time and place, that they've vanished almost completely. Tonight we'll wander through the quiet corners of forgotten tea houses and mountain trails, tracing the ghost aromas of teas lost to history. You're still in your chair, the cup cooling in your hands. Steam curls up like a spirit, soft, restless, almost whispering something. You lean closer, and suddenly the scent changes. You're not in your room anymore. The air tastes like altitude, crisp and thin, and the sky seems too close. You've found yourself in the Himalayas centuries ago, where tea wasn't a beverage, it was survival. Here, among yak herders and monks, tea wasn't steeped for elegance, but for endurance. They churned brick-like blocks of compressed tea with butter, salt, and milk, creating the thick, salty brew known as po cha, or Tibetan butter tea. It was energy in liquid form, keeping hearts warm through snowstorms and wind that could slice through bone. The first sip was a shock, a strange mixture of smoke and salt, but the second brought calm, and the third, something close to peace. Travelers who tried to bring po cha back west rarely succeeded. The taste, they said, was too much of a landscape, too wild, too honest, too far from the gentle bitterness of Ceylon or the delicate fragrance of Darjeeling. But up here, where clouds met the earth, this was not just tea, it was connection. It was memory made drinkable. You move again, time, like steam, drifts sideways. Now you're in Mongolia, where the tea is brewed with mutton fat and flour. A meal in a cup, almost a soup, stirred in copper pots blackened from fire. The Mongols once carried this blend across the steppes, packed in felt bags, their horses steaming in the cold dawn. It was their energy drink long before such things came in neon cans, and far to the west, in the deserts of Persia, tea took on perfume. Here the drinkers didn't chase caffeine, they chased poetry. Tea was steeped with rose petals, cardamom, and a drizzle of saffron, served in small glasses that caught the lamplight like amber. Every cup was an act of devotion, every sip a verse. In Isfahan and Shiraz, poets would say that tea is the silence between two stanzas. In Russia, tea traveled thousands of miles by caravan from China, crossing Siberia in winter caravans that jingled with bells. By the time it reached Moscow, the leaves were smoke-dried and tinged with the scent of campfire. Russians brewed it strong, concentrated in samovars, great brass urns that hummed softly through the night. They mixed it with jam or lemon, drank it from saucers, and called it zavarka. And of course there were the stories of brick tea, pressed into slabs for trade, used as currency in parts of Central Asia. Soldiers, traders, and even thieves could pay for lodging with a chunk of tea. Some archaeologists have found tea bricks so well preserved, they still smell faintly floral after hundreds of years. Imagine that, an empire running on leaves and scent. Some blends were born of scarcity, others of ceremony. In Korea, monks made balyo cha fermented and aged, its taste closer to rain-soaked earth than any leaf you've known. In China's Yunnan province, pu'er tea was stored underground to mature, its flavor deepening like wood grain over decades. Some connoisseurs swore that pu'er aged longer than wine could outlive its owners, its price rising as they faded. Others whispered that the best teas were buried with emperors, sealed in tombs where no living tongue would ever taste them again. And then there were the blends that never reached the history books at all. In the 1800s, when explorers roamed Africa, they found tribes who brewed wild herbs and bark teas unknown to the rest of the world. Some infused tea with smoke from burning acacia wood, others with powdered baobab fruit for sweetness. These brews vanished with the forests that birthed them, leaving behind only the faintest notes in explorers' journals, a cup of bitter gold, taken at sunset. You see, not every tea survived globalization. Some flavors couldn't compete with standardized blends or machine-packed bags. Industrialization made tea universal, but in doing so it made it uniform. The world forgot the teas that smelled too strange, brewed too slowly, or required too much patience. There's an odd comfort in that loss, though, because if every tea were preserved, if every leaf were catalogued, we'd lose the romance of imagining them. The ones we can't taste anymore become stories instead, soft, uncertain, like dreams half remembered at dawn. Take the Song dynasty's whisked tea, for instance. Long before Japan perfected matcha, Chinese scholars whisked powdered tea into froth during poetry contests. Competitors were judged not only by their verses, but by how evenly they could whip the foam. Some even drew tiny landscapes on the surface of their cups with drops of darker brew, a fleeting art that vanished with a sip. Or the London tea auctions, now gone, where for centuries traders gathered to bid on mysterious parcels from India and China. The room would hum with coded murmurs, malty, floral, 2 years old. A gavel struck, fortunes shifted, and somewhere across the ocean, workers plucked another harvest. When the final auction ended in 1998, it was as if the empire's heart had stopped beating in rhythm with the kettle. Even the teas of revolution have faded. During the American Revolution, when imports were boycotted, colonists brewed liberty tea from raspberry leaves and sage. In wartime Britain, with rationing in place, people turned to nettle tea or roasted barley. These makeshift blends carried no prestige, but they carried endurance, the flavor of making do. You begin to realize as the fog of centuries drifts past that tea isn't really about the drink at all. It's about what people needed it to be: comfort, ceremony, defiance, prayer. Every forgotten blend was an answer to a question someone once asked the world: how do I stay warm? How do I belong? How do I remember? The kettle hums again, gently. Maybe you think of your own rituals, how you stir sugar without looking, how you watch the color bloom in the cup. You're part of that lineage now. Even if your tea came from a bag made by machines, somewhere, a historian is still arguing about the true origins of a lost Himalayan blend, or whether the tea buried in the Tang tombs still exists, pressed beneath layers of dust and time. Scholars debate, collectors hunt, monks remember. But the leaves keep their secrets, and maybe that's how it should be. Not everything meant to comfort us must be recovered. Some things are meant to fade, like steam against the window pane, reminding us that even the quietest rituals can shape the world, and then disappear into it. You lift your cup. The tea inside tastes familiar now, but the ghosts are there too, sweet, smoky, salty, floral. History in every sip. The steam from your cup rises slower now, like it's grown tired from the journey. You can almost hear the faint hum of the kettle's last breath fading away. The world feels softer, edges blurred, time stretched thin. The story of tea has wound its way across empires and oceans, through palaces and mountain huts, and somehow it has circled right back to you. Sitting here in the quiet with your hands wrapped around something warm, you take a breath deep and slow, the kind that fills the lungs and smooths the edges of thought. Outside, the night hums faintly. Maybe it's the soft buzz of your fan or the distant rhythm of cars passing, but in this stillness, even the smallest sounds feel ancient. You realize that the leaf that started all this, the one that drifted into a cup of hot water thousands of years ago, never stopped moving. It traveled in caravans and crates, in pockets and porcelain. It's been smuggled, worshipped, taxed, boycotted and steeped in every possible emotion humans can feel. And now here it is, resting in your cup, like the last traveler who finally found a home. If history teaches anything, it's that the smallest things often leave the deepest marks. A leaf, a whisper, a sip. Empires rose and fell, chasing its flavor. Wars brewed, friendships began, revolutions steeped quietly between sentences. Tea wasn't the cause of history, it was its mirror, reflecting the warmth and absurdity of being human. You picture the old tea gardens again, those green slopes in morning mist, where hands still pluck leaves in rhythm with the wind. The same motion repeated for centuries, unchanged, almost meditative. There's something beautiful about that, the idea that a gesture so simple can outlast every throne and treaty. You remember the monks in their stone temples, whisking tea into froth before dawn. The merchants crossing deserts with brick tea strapped to their camels. The English ladies balancing porcelain cups like fragile crowns. The colonists dumping tea into dark Boston waters, sparks of rebellion in every splash. The workers in Calcutta fields, their fingers stained green with empire's appetite. All of them connected, whether they knew it or not, through the quiet ritual of a shared brew. History often feels loud, battles, speeches, revolutions, but tea's story is the opposite. It's a history that whispers. It happens in pauses, in sips between words, in glances over steam. You can't shout while drinking tea. It demands a kind of peace, even if temporary. Maybe that's why it survived everything humans threw at it. Greed, distance, pride. It waited us out, cup by cup. The world today moves faster than any caravan could dream of. Machines pick, process, package, and ship tea in hours. You can order 100 varieties without leaving your bed. Yet even now, when you pour hot water over leaves and wait, that moment, those few seconds of stillness, is a bridge through time. You're doing the same thing an emperor once did, a monk once did, a soldier once did by firelight. You lift the cup again, and the steam curls upward. It carries a memory of mountains, of damp earth, of the people who tended the soil. You wonder how many lives this one leaf has touched, how many lips it's brushed, how many hearts it's soothed. It's humbling, really, to think that something so delicate could survive so much. Sometimes you wish history classes had taught it this way, not as wars and dates, but as flavors and moments. Imagine learning that the Opium Wars began not with cannons, but with a craving for a comforting cup, or that revolutions once brewed in teapots before they erupted in streets. Maybe we'd remember better if history tasted like something. You think of the forgotten blends now, those mountain teas and desert brews that time swallowed. Somewhere out there, a few still survive, quietly. A village elder who still knows how to roast leaves over open fire. A family recipe passed down through whispers. Not for profit, not for prestige, just for continuity. Just to remember, and you're part of that chain too. When you make your next cup, you're keeping something alive, not just a tradition, but an echo of human persistence. Tea doesn't demand devotion, only presence. You can't rush it. You pour, you wait, you breathe. That waiting, those few slow minutes, might be the closest thing to time travel we have. Some historians still debate when exactly tea became tea. Was it the Tang dynasty? Earlier? Later? Did it begin as medicine or pleasure? But the truth doesn't matter much anymore. The leaf doesn't care. It only asks to be steeped and shared. History can argue all it wants. Meanwhile, the kettle sings. You smile at that thought. The absurdity of it. How the greatest empires in history once depended on trade routes of dried leaves. How fortunes rose and fell on the flavor of something that weighs almost nothing. It's almost funny how human we are to find meaning in the mundane, to fight over what we love and then eventually to sip it quietly in the dark. The night deepens. The fan hums steady. Your cup is nearly empty now. A faint trace of warmth left at the bottom. You tilt it and the last drop slides down, slow as time. It's softer now. The taste, the moment, everything. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the tea fields again, the rustle of leaves, the sigh of mist rolling through valleys. You can see the lanterns in old tea houses glowing dimly, voices murmuring like low music. You can feel the silk sleeve of a scholar lifting a porcelain cup. The hush before a poem, the quiet after a war. And as all those centuries fold into one long exhale, you start to drift. The world outside fades, streetlights blur into amber smudges, sound turns liquid. The story slows its pulse. You breathe in one more time, letting the last traces of history settle like tea dust at the bottom of your mind. The leaf has done its work. The wars are over. The voices are gone. All that remains is warmth. You're safe now. You're here, just you and the quiet hum of the present moment. The story doesn't need an ending, it just needs rest. Let the steam fade. Let the cup cool. Let your thoughts sink, slow and gentle like tea leaves finding the bottom of the pot. End of script. Sweet dreams.